Yeah, good evening, folks. You're welcome to another edition of Just Banter. Tonight, we're having a very, very interesting discussion with a great fellow, somebody who has been here quite a few times. He's turned to more or less our in house historian and analyst when it comes to socio political affairs, especially when it comes to Africa. Tonight, we're going to be talking about Crown and Empire. In light of recent events, the Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth II, passed on after a 70-year reign. Now there were a lot of mixed emotions, about the Queen. Some people had, very fond memories of her, which I would say was in the majority in terms of when you look at online, comments and all that. But then also there were quite a few people who had quite a few things to say that were negative in terms of not her person particularly, but the British Empire, the colonial legacy, and a lot of the things that went with, the colonial legacy. A lot of atrocities were attributed to the colonialists, be it the British, the French, the Portuguese, all spread, evenly across. But tonight we're going to be talking only about the British Empire. The British came to the shores of Africa, West Africa particularly, shortly after the Portuguese. And they were there for what a lot of people would deem forever. Was it forever? What was their impact? What exactly happened during the period that we're there? And then, in terms of post colonial legacies, where exactly did they leave their colonies? Tonight, we're going to be talking to Jawad Iginla. Jawad, like I said previously, is our in house historian and, of course, a very good friend of the house. Jawad is a very, very knowledgeable fellow when it comes to the issues of colonialism, when it comes to the colonial legacies, and then, of course, the impact of the British Empire, particularly in Nigeria. We'll bring Jawad on shortly after this quick commercial break. We'll be right back shortly after this. Hello, Jawad.
Hello, Abib. How you doing? How you doing?
I'm all right. How you doing, my brother? I hope you're great
Not
today.
bad, not bad.
All
Blessed.
right,
Yeah.
right. Jawad, so first things first, I think probably we should take a couple of seconds, not a minute, a couple of seconds of silence for the Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth II, on her passing. Because whether we like it or not, first things first, we were Yoruba, and the Yoruba are bore a lack of empathy towards either the grieving or the bereaved. So I believe we should take a couple of seconds and then we'll continue our discussion after that. Okay. May Her Majesty's soul rest in peace. Now, Jawad,
Hmm.
Queen Elizabeth passed recently, and there have been a lot of comments from everywhere. A lot of people have had some good things to say,
Mhm.
some people have had negative things to say. Now, I'm
Mhm.
talking particularly about the Crown colonies, stretching all the way from Australia down to Ireland, from Ireland to Nigeria. There was a very popular tweet by a Nigerian professor, Professor Uju Anya, in the United States, who, passed a very, I don't know how to categorize that particular comment, but that comment seems to have generated quite a lot of heat from different quarters. For the third richest man in the world to have taken notes, and he even made a statement like, "Is this somebody that's meant to be changing the world?" But what that basically meant to somebody like myself was that the impact of that statement was very, very far reaching. It was very deep. A lot of people took offense, but quite a few people supported her as well. Now, you being a historian, you understanding the impact of colonialism on Africa. where do we start from in the first place? Now that the Queen has passed, you now have King Charles. And like they say, God save the King. There seems to be a lot of emphasis on God saving either the King or the Queen. But what about the people?
The British Empire, the empire on which the sun never sets. It is so sad. Well, there's a joke in India. The joke goes like this. The joke is the reason the sun never sets on the empire is because even God does not trust the British.
Even God does not trust the British.
Trust the British in the dark.
Amazing.
Then stuff can happen.
I'm hearing that for the first time.
Well, you're hearing it now. So, first things first. If we start, let's start from the Eastern Board. When Captain Cook landed on the shores of Australia, he went with the idea that they were charting the world.
They were charting the world.
Mm-hmm. So he got to Australia. He found people on the land, and people you and I would now know as the Aborigines. What did they do to the Aborigines? They proceeded to systematically kill them off. The only thing that saved the Aborigines was the fact that they knew the land. They had their ways of knowing how they survived. So where they were able to survive. Now, were they able to survive on the charity of the British? No, they were not. Because the British had an idea they were going to use it as the first colony. Now, first colony, was it? It wasn't. The first attempt was actually in 1787 on the west coast of Africa, in a place you and I now know as Sierra Leone.
Okay.
A ship headed off from East London called the HMV Peace, I believe, yes, set sail with prisoners, ex-convicts, a few, what do you call them? Prostitutes and walkabouts, and of course, some previously enslaved people. They were put on a ship, set sail for Sierra Leone. They landed there. That story is chronicled in a book titled, I'm looking at the book actually as I'm speaking right now. That's the funny thing. I'll get it away if we go on a break then.
Okay.
Yeah. So they got settled, but nature took its course. And what do I mean by nature? Within 6 months, of the 600 people that landed there, there were only 59 remaining. They've been wiped out by malaria.
Wow.
So that became a failed venture. They then look away from Africa, went to Sierra Leone. Went to Australia.
Yeah.
So when the idea that, okay, fine, we're going to settle this place happened, they settled. What did they do? They brought prisoners from Britain onto Australian soil. They settled the land, as they would call it.
Yes.
In their mind, they said there were no peoples on there because they didn't categorize the Australians, the native Australians, the Aborigines, as human beings. In fact, the classification only ended in 1973. did they lose their designation as part of flora and fauna? Flora means part of plants and animals.
Yeah.
That was only then. And the legacy of that still remains in place till today. When, what's her name? When Kathy Freeman ran for Australia, that was the first time you will see an Aborigine become the face of Australian athletics. Now we move forward. We come to India. No, sorry. We go back to Hong Kong. Hong Kong was effectively Britain's first colony outside the shores of England.
Okay.
And then came Australia, then came India, and then they moved westwards. Now, why am I going in tandem like that? Because to understand what happened thereafter, you have to understand what happened before.
Yeah.
So when they went into Hong Kong, they dealt trade with the Chinese emperor at the time. Now, the Chinese emperor was like, okay, what do you want? This is what I've got to sell you. I've got silk, I've got paper, I've got tea. What do you want? What do you want to buy? The British guy who went in there at the time said, well, you're going to have to buy my stuff.
Yes.
The guy says, no, that's not how it works here. I want to sell you stuff. I don't want to buy whatever it is. Besides, there's nothing of yours that is worth anything to me. The guys took offense, went back to Queen Elizabeth. Queen Elizabeth,
That's Elizabeth the First.
the first,
Yes.
sent out a flotilla ship to to Hong Kong. But before they got to Hong Kong, they stopped over in a place called Afghanistan.
Okay.
What did they stop for in Afghanistan? They got opium. So they effectively flooded Hong Kong with opium. Hong Kong, by extent of being part of China at that time, became the gateway for the Opium War. You are going to have it. They turned millions of people into addicts. And that was the way they could enter China. By entering China, they effectively locked down Hong Kong. Hong Kong will go back to China in 1997. So we move forward again. We go to India. India becomes the story, the fable story, land in the sun.
Yes.
India was wealthy. India was one of the largest. In fact, at the time Britain, the UK went into India. India had 23% of the world's economy.
23%.
23%. By the time Britain left India in 1947, India only had 3%. So that puts into context whether the idea of colonialism was good for the indigenes or not. That's just a premise. Now they came into Africa. The first point of call in Africa was Nigeria. From Nigeria, moved up the Niger, Sudan, Kenya, Somalia, Uganda, Egypt, and then they settled. The policy of the British was this. They came in first with the religion.
Mm-hmm.
Next, they brought in trade. We trade brought people so they could settle in certain pockets. The only place they didn't really settle was Nigeria. But every other place, they settled population. In Rhodesia, in Zimbabwe and Zambia, which was at that time, which was North and South Rhodesia, So North will become Zambia, North Rhodesia will become Zambia, South Rhodesia will become Zimbabwe.
Zimbabwe.
Yeah. So, and Uganda, they settled in Uganda. They settled in Kenya. They are still in Kenya. They settled in Egypt. Then a bit in Egypt, but not as the numbers are still in Kenya. Now, why is this very important? This is very important in the sense that they didn't operate the French model, which was direct rule.
Okay.
They operated indirect rule. And how do you get people you don't directly control to act to your bidding? You find interlopers. Where did they get these interlopers from? India. That's why you have the Indian population on the African continent. They didn't come before the British. They came with the British. So you have them in places like South Africa, Uganda, Kenya, to a lesser extent in Egypt.
Yes.
But those eastern countries, eastern board
Yeah.
countries.
They have a very large population in Kenya. Yes.
That is why. So if you then go outside the coast, after the what's it called? After the shores of Africa, you go into the Caribbean. The same thing also happened, because once slavery ended in the 1830s, once slavery ended, and they found that the people were not going to work for them, what they did was they brought indentured servants from the continent, from India. If
For the
you
sake
go
of
to the Caribbean,
context,
you will also have
for
Indians.
the sake of context, what are indentured servants?
Okay, indentured servants are essentially, you either owe a debt to society or you owe a debt to a certain person. So that debt is only expiated, which is only gotten rid of if you can work for a certain period of time. So what you do, what they then had people do is, people who were debted to, I say, a company in India, that company will sell that rights to a company in the Caribbean, and they will bring that people across. So those people will walk away that debt in the course of that company. So that's essentially what indenture servitude is.
Okay.
So fast forward the 1880s. I'm now coming back to the continent of Africa. In the 1880s, just as the idea of slavery as a form of trade was ceasing to be, in fact, there was still pushback within the local population to keep the slave trade going, but it was not to be. So whilst the local societies were thinking of what else to trade on, of course, some people did. They diversified their trade into natural minerals like palm oil, like palm oil, like cloths, like what else, like gold and what have you. And the moment that became thriving, came the first company from the shores of Britain. Essentially, the first charter companies, as you and I know it, the Royal African Company came in. So when the Royal African Company came in, the idea was then that you are going to deal with us. But people like, I'll give you an example, people like Jawad Iginla was already dealing with traders in Liverpool. So he was already making big money. So now imagine somebody now coming in to tell him, listen, you're going to have to deal with me. You can't deal with that. And Jawad was like, no, I already have my links. Why would I need to trade with you? So to concoct a story, they went back to Britain and lied on Jawad that Jawad was still dealing in slaves. So Jawad was tricked onto a ship, captured, and exiled to Bahrain. Bahamas. That's where he died. He never quite returned. So eventually, what you then have was a series of intervention. The next very important event that happened was the British expedition of 1897 in Benin, which will bring us to the reason why you have the Benin bronzes.
Okay, I think
which
we're losing you there for a second. I think
yeah,
the network was
yeah,
a bit bad.
Yeah. Are we okay?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. So now, the next pivotal event then was the 1897 British Benin expedition. What was the Benin expedition about? It was again an extension of the trade into the hinterland. Now, in order for you to go past a certain part of the river, you need to have visited the Oba of Benin. And at that time, Captain Phillips, who was the guy who initially wanted to go and see the Oba of Benin, was a bit adamant that he will see the Oba of Benin, in spite of the fact that he'd been made aware that there was a traditional ceremony at the time to which no foreign dignitary or no foreign person can be part of, or can see anybody, or can come into that territory.
Okay.
Nevertheless, he put a couple of boats together. They went in. They attempted to shoot. The Bini warriors repelled them and what have you. When the news got back to Britain, it was sold as the fact that they didn't quite say that part of what I just told you. That is only after the papers and the archives has been released. That is when people are now knowing that part of the story. Now, why is that important? That is important in the sense that were it for the fact that everybody was privy to the idea that certain things were going on, and that's the reason why Phillips should not have gone in, those bronzes will probably not be in the Benin in the British Museum.
Yeah.
But they were. So once the bronzes were carted and everything, what did they then do? They then exiled the Oba of Benin to Calabar. He would eventually die in Calabar.
Is that Oba Overanwe?
Oba Overanwe, correct.
Okay.
He would eventually die in Calabar. Now, some people might say, oh, well, but he said there were human sacrifices and everything. Cultures evolve. The fact that something happens now doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be happen in 10 years' time. Slavery, transatlantic slavery, as you and I look back on it now, existed for 500 years. 500 years, that's 5 centuries. Divided by 25, that's the number of generations that are involved. So, has the colonialism in Africa, has it been good to us? We can look across the continents. Some of the problems we live with till today are the hallmark of that interaction.
So what you have said now, brings us to a very pertinent question that a lot of people have been asking, and which has been the thrust of most of the angst that people have displayed, on social media particularly. Now, the beauty of social media is a lot of people who ordinarily their voices could not be heard are now being heard. A lot of people are now able to express their own opinions, cogent or non-cogent. Some making sense, some utter nonsense. But still, it is a place where people can actually voice their own opinions. They own their own tiny space. So it's a case of the media has been democratized up to a certain extent. When we look at the legacy of the British Empire, let us first start from the oldest, known accounts to the most recent. Let us first start with the Royal West African Frontier Force. The Royal West African Frontier Force fought on the side of the British Empire. They didn't even fight on the side of the British Empire. They were conscripted. So they fought, for the British Empire during World War One. They fought in Burma and all of that. Now, for those who are watching, you can actually see some of those soldiers on the screen. These were soldiers who gave their lives and fought for the British Empire as they knew it as at that time, basically because it was supposed to be themselves that they were fighting for, their own freedom, their own emancipation. But at the end of the day, Jawad, it was said that these soldiers were neither recognized nor were they compensated for their service to the British Empire.
That is one of the what should I use? That is one of the misnomer about the idea of fighting for empire.
Okay.
I'll give it. Do you know there is no known memorial to soldiers from India, soldiers from the Caribbean, soldiers from Africa on the British soil up till 2017? There is one for horses that died in the war. It's in Hyde Park Corner.
Amazing.
It's in Hyde Park Corner, central London, tourist area, footprint. Guess where the one for the soldiers of the Caribbean, Africa, and India is?
Please, where is it?
It's it's in Brixton, Windruff Square, a tiny little corner. You could Google it.
So that is the extent of the recognition of their contributions.
It was so
empire.
bad. Yeah, it was so bad that the cenotaph, the cenotaph in central London, right opposite number 10 Downing Street, on that main road, thoroughfare, up to Trafalgar Square. When it came to marching soldiers through, for them to get recognition from the British population, not one soldier of color marched. There were soldiers from New Zealand, there were soldiers from Canada, there were soldiers from South Africa, but not the kind you and I will recognize. There were no soldiers from India, there were no soldiers from Africa. And it was deliberate. If you read what's it called? Wait a second. If you read this guy's book,
The World's War.
Yeah, David Olusoga. David Olusoga. It goes into it in detail. Sometimes you read these books and you're like, really? Did this really happen? I mean, it was so bad that when soldiers got injured and they were brought to Britain, they passed an edict that white nurses and white doctors cannot deal with them directly. It was only when the soldiers protested, that was when that law was rescinded. It's all in there.
So now, I'm gobsmacked. My jaw is touching the floor because I'm actually wondering, how to actually process this.
And
now,
they fought for empire.
And they fought for empire. Now, a lot of people who have stood up right now and have been talking about the monarchical system and actually saying abolish, the monarchy. they have a point that they're trying to make.
Mhm.
The people who are talking about reparations for colonialism, they also have a point that they're trying to make. What you're saying to me now, or what you're telling the audience basically, is this: regardless of what your contributions are, there was no recognition. At, I mean, those early days. Nowadays, we see people being given KBs and all that as far back as the 50s. So you have the likes of Sir Kanu Ibiam,
Mhm.
whom has also come into, the memory of quite a few people
Yeah, yeah. I
who
know.
know something about him. They
Mhm.
posted and tweeted quite a few things about, his legendary, you know, um, denouncing his knighthood of the British Empire based on, the contentious issue of the Biafran War.
The Biafra War, yeah.
We've seen people in recent times who have been given OBEs and all of that. Um, Actors, black actors, even black actors, a black actor of Nigerian origin, David, his name sounded like that, David Olushoga as well, but anyways, you have people like that who are being honored in recent times.
Mm.
But the people who put in their blood, their sweat, and their lives
Mm.
were not honored. Now, you spoke about the Benin bronzes a bit earlier on.
Mm.
The Benin bronzes were a clear indication of how sophisticated, how advanced sociopolitically the Benin people were, or should I say the Edo were, as far back as 1657, 1658, where the Portuguese actually made an account of what they saw in Benin. Yet, they went into Benin, pillaged Benin, and for those who are watching, you can also see the Benin bronzes are scattered in different museums, within the British stronghold, which is the United Kingdom. And people have been saying, should these things not have been returned by now? These are part of the questions that were raised that brought about asking what exactly was the influence of the late Queen, Queen Elizabeth, to this empire. Could she have done a lot differently? Could she have made amends aside the giving apologies, that were given at some point in time or the other? What exactly were her powers? What could she have done to have made things better whilst she was on the throne? She was there for 70 years. And a lot of things still happened within the 70 years that shocks the mind. A lot of people do not realize that up to recent times, compensation was being paid to families and individuals who were slave owners. Now, I think I need to put that on the screen so that if you're watching this, you can actually see. I'm going to read it out for those who are only listening on audio. So, the title is Compensating Slaveholders After Abolition. The UK Treasury continued to compensate the descendants of slave owners for decades after the abolition of slavery in the empire. The payments were not scrutinized until the British Treasury tweeted out the historical fact in 2018. 2018, that's just yesterday. Anyways, the amount of money borrowed for the Slavery Abolition Act was so large that it wasn't paid off until 2015, which means that living British citizens helped to pay to end the slave trade, the tweet read. The tweet was widely criticized at the time, with many outraged that current British tax dollars, well, pounds sterling, were compensating the descendants of slave owners. The Treasury later deleted the tweet. While the British government hasn't disclosed a complete list of the recipient individuals and firms of bonds related to the compensation for slaves, researchers at University College London have compiled a list of over 46,000 current individuals and groups who have received government payouts related to the abolition of slavery. Many powerful British families, including current business and political elites in the United Kingdom, are among the recipients uncovered by the UCL team. Yet, not all recipients were already wealthy or became so due to the payouts. Now, this is amazing. So basically, what we are seeing here is that the legacy of slavery lived up till 2015. So it's not as far away as people thought it was. This is
No,
actually something that carried over into 2015.
no. It is endemic in the sense that beyond that headline, I will encourage the viewers to get this book.
Okay.
It's titled The Interests: How the British Establishment Resisted the Abolition of Slavery.
Okay.
It is a powerful book, a very powerful book. You see, it's the thing is, the truth is out there, in the sense that although we might not necessarily have the time and what have you, but we can chew gum and walk at the same time.
Yeah.
And for us as Black people, it is important that we hold this notion that we know our history. I've been doing this post on Facebook, which is facts, not
Yeah.
feelings, for the last couple of days. And the reason I'm doing it is because of stuff like this. People think history is yesterday or history is 400 years ago. 2015. I remember when that tweet came out, and I remember how they quickly scrubbed it.
Well, for anybody who is watching this, you can actually go and do the fact check. We'll put the link for the fact check, in the comments section, so you can just click on it and then you could just confirm a reference.
Yeah.
So sorry, go on, Jawad.
So as I was saying, all these stories, they're not far-fetched. They live with us. We've been living with them. The legacy of it is around us. The statues. You go to a place like Parliament Square in central London. In the square, there are statues around. And if you follow the dates on that statues and you look at the dates on those statues just put it through Google, see what comes up. It's all about you and I, all about the violence, suppression, exploitation. The only person that escapes any scrutiny there is Mandela in that square. The rest, Winston Churchill, the Bengal famine, General Smoot, apartheid, South Africa.
Yeah.
I could go on, Lord Kitchener, India. The only person missing there is Lugard. He will have completed the trio, in the sense that he used Maxim gun to kill so many people in Uganda.
Also in northern Nigeria, as far as I know, or as far as I can recall, because there were several accounts of the massacres in Katsina, in Sokoto, were in the quest to subdue
them. Yes.
They were using Gatling guns, I think they were called.
They are called Gatling gun, and there's a popular British saying: we have the Maxim gun, they do not, which is why we will subdue them. So for somebody to own that kind of statement is effectively saying it is either you submit or we subjugate you. Which is it going to be? The choice is yours. So fast forward now, people will then say, oh, but that is what happened in the past. Our leaders.
But this is not in the past. I mean, this is not in the past, because I mean, I'll put that back up, and then I go back to it. Right? It said until 2015. It wasn't paid off until 2015. So if people were still receiving payments as compensation for giving up their slaves. So human beings were their property, right? And these
Yeah.
are countries where we talk about the freedom of expression, the right to liberty, the right to freedom. But behind closed doors, these types of payments were still being made to people to compensate them. How is this in the past? This is not in the past. This is today. This is
It,
today.
it is today. It is today. But that is for someone, for you and I who care. For them, they see the word slavery, abolition. They're thinking 1800s. They're not going into details. Because my people, most of my people don't read. Don't.
People have never asked, how come they are paying, the former slave owners compensation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But for the families, let's even say that you can't pay everybody. At least there are quite a few families that could have been traced, that could have been paid. They still have, slave returnees from Brazil and the ones from
Mm-hmm.
Sierra Leone that
Mm-hmm.
went to Lagos, that we actually have accounts of who they are, the families. They were not paid any compensation,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but the slave owners were being paid compensation. How ironic is that?
It's very ironic in the sense that who is going to push the idea of compensation? Who is pushing it? Our governments are not pushing it, at least not loud enough. A few scattered voices here or there when there is no concerted effort. The only reason why we're showcasing the idea of the monarchy as it is because people, you and I, have gotten on the internet and, like you started, because of democratized media, people tweeted. Professor Anya stated the case. Jeff Bezos put his nose in. People came at him. Why? Because people are getting aware. People who have been quiet before have found their voices. It used to be okay just to be told, oh, David Livingstone discovered, Mongo Park discovered River Niger. Logic determines that you and I ask the question. Okay, there's a river, right? There's a river which he discovered. That river, are there no people at the edges of that river?
Of course, it is common sense that
Yeah,
in
but then,
ancient times, of course,
mhm,
people
mhm.
gravitated towards where there were sources of water. So definitely there were people that lived on the banks or in close proximity to those rivers
I
and their
mean, you are
tributaries.
you are no, you are engaging in an intellectual argument of justifying. I'm asking the question. That's your house. You live there. The water passes in front of your house. Is it a discovery?
when we look at a lot of the education that has been given,
Mhm.
you have to start to ask yourself, did you truly get an education? Because if you're being told things like the discovery, for instance, and all of that, then you
Yes.
have to look, at yourself and ask yourself, just like what you said, this is my house, and the water was passing in front of my house, and then you came from somewhere and you say you have discovered the water. That means it was uncharted territory, and then you are the first person probably to have gone there and then documented it. That's basically what it means. Now, fortunately or unfortunately, education has evolved, or should I say, our perception as individuals with the type of education that we have gotten would naturally evolve over time. And then we'll now start to ask the questions. Which brings us back to that initial question of, could the late queen have done better? Could she have actually exercised some form of deeper compassion towards these issues? She was known to be a very strong woman. She was known to be a woman that was steadfast. Were all these attributes extended to the African colonies?
Okay, I'm going to say something very, in light of what we're talking about, it's not going to be, some people might not know, but then it's the kind of stuff we live with.
Yes.
She became queen in 1952. Yeah? Where did she get the news? She got the news in Kenya
Yes.
in 1952. She went home. Okay, no, she was on her honeymoon, so they were touring. They were touring the Commonwealth,
Yes.
and then they stopped in Kenya. That's when they got the sad news that her father had passed. So she was in Kenya in 1952. Guess what else started in 1952 in Kenya?
Mau Mau.
It is called the Mau Mau by the British because they were trying to make people think the Mau Mau were savages. So that the moment you say Mau Mau, you don't really ask the question, what is the Mau Mau about?
Oh,
That
yeah.
was intentional.
Okay.
So the Mau Mau, as the world knows it, is actually the Kenyan Freedom and Land Army. The Kenyan Freedom Land Army. What
Yeah.
were they? What were they on about? They were on about the fact that their lands, primarily of the largest indigenous people in Kenya, the Kikuyus, were in the highlands, have been appropriated. And it goes back to the question I started with, to the point I made earlier, which is the fact that when Britain moves, it settles people.
Yes.
At that time, the Queen visited, there were over 10,000 Europeans in Kenya on those lands that belong to the Kikuyus. Yeah? Now, why is that important? It's important in the sense that when she came to Kenya in 1952, she was given a lodge. That lodge was known as the Sagana Lodge. That lodge was part of the highlands. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was said it was given to her by the Kenyan people. By the
Mm.
Kenyan people. Bearing in mind, Kenya only became independent December 12th, 1962. So you got a gift from the Kenyan people in 1952, 10 years before they had the right to give you anything. So who was doing the giving?
Hmm.
Who was doing the taking? She
Yeah.
took. So the logic question is, people are subjugated, but you took something from them anyway. So which means you have full capacity. Now, here is where it gets interesting. The queen is aware of everything that happens in the Commonwealth. She gets a briefcase every week.
The red briefcase.
The red briefcase. So between 1952 and 1962, that Kenya was okay. Kenya was under what's it called? What do they call them? There's I'm trying to think of the word they call it again. A state of emergency. Kenya was under a state of emergency from 1952 to 1960 to December 31st, 1960. Now, in that 8 years, she will have gotten a briefcase every week for 52 weeks. So she knew what was happening. So choosing to not say anything, maybe that's part of their nods. But it gets further interesting. Here is where it gets interesting. In 1972,
Yes.
there was a place called the Chaguan Islands. The Chaguan Islands. It used to be part of Mauritius, the Chaguan Islands. A very beautiful atoll. It's horseshoe. It's in a horseshoe shape.
Yeah.
In 1972, that piece of land, people were deported from it. The dogs were gassed. Animals were killed. The people who were living there were deported onto the Mauritius main island. So effectively creating internal refugees. Yeah? What happened to their island? That island became Diego Garcia. Do you know what Diego Garcia is?
No.
It's the largest American military base in the Indian Ocean. And it was signed over by the Privy Council, the head of the Privy Council, to the Americans. Who is the head of the Privy Council? Queen Elizabeth II. There you go.
So she was complicit, basically, from what you're saying, in all these issues. Now, some people would argue that these were issues that were of interest to her nation and all that. But when some people say that these were issues that were, of interest to her nation, and of course, every nation fights for its own interest, you now have to wonder, for her being the largest landowner in the world, the head of state of 16 countries, I believe, something like that, how many of those countries did she actually have the interests of those countries on par with her primary constituency, which was England?
The question remains. What was the point of empire in the first place?
That was a case of interest. That was a case of interest, wasn't it? It was to enrich their society and all of that.
That's it. So to think somehow in the course of that, all of a sudden our interest will supersede the original interest, I think we're being a little bit naive there.
Some people have even argued, as in recent times, because like I said, there's been a lot of chatter. So some people have even argued in recent times that only a certain few actually enjoyed the benefits of empire. The average common man on the streets of London, for instance, there are no benefits. When you take a walk along the River Thames and you get, close to, I think, the piers end around Belvedere or just before Belvedere. There are different piers there. So you have piers, the Spice Pier, you have the Papaya Pier, you have the Tick Pier, and all of that. These were piers that were used for importation of different products that were brought into the United Kingdom, and those piers were named according to the products that were coming in on those piers. But barely 500 meters from the street that separates the pier and the houses on the waterfront, there was a lot of poverty in those days. So there actually was no benefit to the common man that was on the streets. But this same common man still supported the idea of empire.
Because the idea is sold them that they are still better than the average black man. There's a book titled The Africa That Never Was.
Yes.
Where the depiction of African people is that of savages, beastly creatures, people whose only language is grunting. There is also the book that came out back in the day. You probably know it, Heart of Darkness.
Yes.
By Joseph Conrad. That book was pillared by Chinua Achebe. It's till today that's the the tear down of that book is still regarded as the best tear down of a book ever done by an author. And his tear down is actually in his book of essays titled Hope and Impediments under Joseph Conrad, Heart of Darkness by Chinua Achebe. If you read it, it's a classic. People have read that book,
Yes.
The Heart of Darkness. The elites have read it. Yeah. The common man of the street has read it. And so when we come onto their streets and they see us, the first question is, oh, you're from Africa, aren't you? What do you do? Do you live up trees? Do you wash? You know, that sort of stuff. It's because of indoctrination. Again, education, two sorts of education. Education for us, as we know it, was so that we could learn enough to help them in their cause. It wasn't education to liberate you. It was education to help them in their cause. Here, the education is to indoctrinate them to understand that you over there are less than. So, and to try as much as possible to keep you guys apart. Because the moment you come together and you start talking, like you and I are doing now, we start seeing commonalities. And when we see commonalities, what is it they say? The moment people are aware of who the oppressor is, they will focus their attention.
Yeah.
So the education system as we have it now in Nigeria, even the fee-paying education in Nigeria is not centered. I believe we were having a discussion over the weekend where you asked the question, why is it that our sciences textbooks are not in our native languages? What is stopping us doing that? Because our leaders don't understand the play. And when they do, they're taken out, and the ones that are there would keep for the oppressor. So that's why you have, if you look, just go through the newspapers or tweets or, or posts, look at all the leaders in their response to the passing of the Queen. I mean, it's not so much as the fact that they express remorse or what. It's the nature of the fawning. Oh. You could say, well, we express our condolences, blah, blah, and that's it, done. The continuing fawning lets you lose sight of the fact that you don't know. You're basically wearing your own chains. You're basically chaining yourself and staying there. That don't worry, I'm here when you're ready.
The Stockholm Syndrome.
Stockholm Syndrome. I can empathize with you without being stupid about it. Yeah, you're dead, you're dead. We all have a price to pay at some point. And you've lived a very fruitful life in your context. Might not be fruitful for me or my people. So why should I be all happy, jock jiving? I mean, it is just, it's silly. I'm sorry. It's just silly.
Okay.
And the country is 60 years old. Or most of the countries are 60 years old.
Yes, most of the countries actually did get their independence, got their independence under the reign of Queen Elizabeth. And some people think that she should have been given accolades for that. But some people are also of the opinion that the same way you had colonialism, you have neo-colonialism. So there's a continuum. It's just a strategy that is different. That probably is going to be a topic that we'll discuss on another day. For today, 2 questions. The first is this. What is your opinion of that tweet by Professor Uju Anya? That's 1. 2, the wounds of the Biafra War seem to be very fresh. It has been brought up again in terms of colonialism, how the Northern Protectorate and the Southern Protectorate were lumped together, and the colony of Lagos, and how it seems to be a forced union. How the British were accused of, excuse me, how the British were accused of having supported the Nigerian forces during the Biafran War. And that is probably what led to that tweet by Professor Uju Anya. We are not going to take up the issue of the Biafra in depth today. We're going to be doing a follow-up, session on that. So that's going to be a totally different program on its own, which I'm sure if you're watching this, you probably don't want to miss that. And you're probably going to want to tell a couple of people about that as well, because it's something that a lot of people would want to listen to and they'll want to participate in, either via comments or calling in and all that. But I'm just asking Jawad these questions so that he can just give me or give us, that is to say, quick short answers to those two questions. Jawad.
Okay. First to Professor Anya's comments. It would be disrespectful to me to tell her how to feel. Feelings are
Apt, yes.
independent. They are personal. We started this by a minute silence. She probably won't have a minute silence. That's her prerogative. What she says is her prerogative. She's old enough to know what to say. Now, on the issue of the Biafra War, there's a clip out on the internet, and it is important for people to see it. If you put in the name, it will probably come up. If you put in the name Woodrow Wyatt, Woodrow Wyatt. He was an MP at the time, and he was on a TV program. And on that TV interview, he said something which was very poignant. When he was implored to stop the arming of the Nigerian government about the civil war, his response was, why should we stop? Because if we stop, the Russians will do it anyway. So regardless of the amount of people that dies, I'm paraphrasing now, regardless of the amount of people who died, it is important that Britain maintains its support of the Nigerian side by supplying them with arms, because to not do so would mean the oil in that place would go to the Russians. The oil is far more important than the lives of people being killed. That's what he is saying. So now he represents the empire. Now, how would you speak to Professor Anya's statements after hearing that? Because he specifically didn't care about who was being killed on that side. Why should she care about who died on this side?
Wow, very poignant. Jawad, this has been, a very deep and interesting session. I'm sure that if we keep talking, we will drag it on and on and on and on forever, and we just might not end this. Now, on the note of Professor Uju Anya, I've also had, a feedback or two based on my opinion of her tweet. My personal opinion also was of the fact that she had the right to state whatever she wanted to state. Whether she was right, whether she was wrong, well, she bears the consequences of her actions. Was she right in saying what she wanted to say? Maybe. Was her timing off? Maybe. Who is meant to determine that? I don't know. Because if you look at the essence of her tweet, she spoke about half of her family being displaced and killed as a consequence of the Biafran War. That was a war that was politically motivated, and Nigeria still has not healed. There was no victor and no
No
vanquished.
vanquish.
The entire country lost. Whether you say a group of people, i.e., the Igbos, lost more people or not, the impact is still being felt today. It's still being felt amongst families, because even as of that time, you still had a lot of people who had intermarried. So Hausa marrying Igbo, Igbo marrying Yoruba, Yoruba marrying Shekiri, and all of that. So everybody lost something. So there should be some form of empathy across board. You can't tell somebody who is grieving how to grieve. So for Professor Ujuanya, I really don't know what to say about it, except for the fact that she has every right to have, made her comments, and whatever, anybody wants to throw at her for making those comments. I'm not sure whether she has, the temerity to be able to handle it, but it seems like she does, because I saw a video of her dancing earlier today. So meaning that regardless of what anybody thinks, she still stands by what, her opinion is. So on that note, we're going to take a good night off tonight. It's been a very interesting discussion with Jawad Iginla on the issue of crown and empire. We've been able to analyze a few things, and it's come to the fore that whoever wears the crown bears the responsibility. And if you bear the responsibility, then people have every right to react to you based on what they feel is your impact on their lives, positive or negative. I wish her personally, a good night's rest. May the good Lord, bless her soul. I am Yoruba, so we always pray for the dead. Some, of the new school Yorubas, or the new thought Yorubas, people like
They
Jawad
pray
are like,
one
it doesn't matter, if you deserve a cruel,
man,
farewell,
they'll follow you into the grave.
it will follow you to the grave. So, to all those who are mourning, the late Queen of England, I commiserate with you and my condolences on her passing. For those who were celebrating in my second country, the Republic of Ireland, I saw videos of people jubilating inside the stadium and all that. I would have played that tonight, but I actually still feel it is rather insensitive for people to have done that. But they also suffered quite a bit in terms of the war of liberation for the Republic of Ireland, or for the
The
entire
Irish,
island of Ireland
the Irish
as a
famine.
whole. Irish famine. I mean, there are so many things that you can talk about, but the most popular is Irish famine.
Irish famine, yeah.
And just barely a couple of weeks ago, we celebrated posthumously Michael Collins, who is and always will be a hero to the Republic of Ireland, and he was murdered, based on his views and his position on trying to fight for liberation for the Republic of Ireland.
Hmm.
So different people have their own different views on what the crown and empire stands for. I'd like to bid everybody a very good night. We'll see you shortly. Sometimes we are on Instagram, so if you do want to join us sometimes on Instagram, I think you probably have to follow us on From a Radio on Instagram, or you can follow my handle at Habib. It's on your screen, and you will always be able to get a notification when we go live, because sometimes it's a bit convenient to just go live on Instagram. The Instagram discussions are much lighter. It's always a case of something that's on spur of the moment. So you probably might enjoy that as well. But you can always catch us on either for a live session or the recorded sessions. You can go to our YouTube channel and you can catch up on some of the vast amount of sessions that we have had on so many topics, and we're still coming up with much, much more. We're going to be talking a lot about politics, in the coming days, because we're now in the political season in Nigeria, and Nigeria happens to be arguably the most important country in Black Africa. So everything and anything that happens in Black Africa, Nigeria affects it. Some do not believe that Nigeria is the giant of Africa anymore. I still believe that it is. We just need to focus on developing our capacity, and every other thing will follow almost automatically. So watch out for several discussions with quite a few politicians that are going to be coming on. It's going to be explosive, it's going to be interesting, and we're going to make sure that you get the best out of it as much as we can. Thank you, everybody, for taking out the time to join us, and see you on the next episode of Just Banter. Jawad Iginla, thank you very much. You have a fantastic night, and we'll see you on the next episode that concerns you.
Hopefully not soon.
All right then. So you take care, and
Okay.
everyone, good night.
Yeah. Thanks.